Yeah, we rig the game as much as we need to, but in the end, they don't transgress.
They can't be punished.
The Cabin in the Woods, the horror comedy from 2011. We all know it's a meta commentary on horror movies themselves, but beneath the surface, there's a lot more going on. In this video, we will be confronting the real horror of The Cabin in the Woods and its surprising connections to some terrifying ancient texts. It's going to be a wild ride, and there will be spoilers. Let us begin. The film depicts a kind of downwards hierarchy. So what is below, what is under the earth, has more power than what is above. So our protagonists, they think they're going on holiday to a remote cabin in the woods. It's actually a controlled zone sealed off from the rest of the world by an invisible wall. Everything they do is being observed and influenced by engineers in an underground facility. These engineers are the puppeteers.
Puppeteers.
But beneath them, even deeper in the earth, is where the real power lies.
What's happening to you is part of something bigger, something older than anything known. You've seen horrible things. An army of nightmare creatures, but they are nothing compared to what came before. What lies below. It's our task to placate the Ancient Ones, as it's yours to be offered up to them.
So it's a system of ritual sacrifice. Young people are put through real horror scenarios, and the shedding of their blood is an offering to placate the Ancient Ones below. The more spectacular the demise, the better.
This we offer in humility and fear for the blessed peace of your eternal slumber, as it ever was.
As it ever was.
So this is obviously taking aim at the horror genre itself. In the film, the Ancient Ones could be seen as stand-ins for the audience, just as horror fans are drawn to stories in which the characters suffer and die. The Ancient Ones want stories in which the characters suffer and die. The only difference is they want it to happen for real.
They don't just want to see us killed. They want to see us punished.
And you might think there's some hypocrisy here because the film seems to be criticising our enjoyment of horror movies, but it's also trying to be an entertaining horror movie in and of itself.
I am never going to see a merman.
Two would be thankful. Those things are terrifying. The cleanup on them is a nightmare.
Oh, come on.
So what's going on there? Does The Cabin in the Woods effectively shoot itself in the foot? Well, I'm not here to defend every aspect of the film, but I think it is consistent because it's clearly not anti-horror storytelling. That really would be a contradiction. We'll see how its ending especially emphasizes the existence of horror and a need to reckon with that horror. So there is a place for horror storytelling, of course there is. What I think is being criticised here is a particular brand of horror filmmaking, exploitation horror. You know, when movies descend into glorifying and enjoying their violence in a sadistic, mean-spirited way. And that's what the engineers are pushing for in The Cabin in the Woods. It's why, for instance, they want Jules to be undressed when she gets attacked.
Okay, baby, let's see some boobies.
Show us the goods.
Nudity and gore are described as the goods that need to be heightened in order to satiate the customers below.
Does it really matter if we see?
We're not the only ones watching, Ken.
Gotta keep the customer satisfied. You understand what's at stake here.
We're going to be diving into what this means and what's really going on with that ending, but first I'd really appreciate it if you could hit the subscribe button if you haven't done so already. It really helps the channel. Thanks so much. Now, the question of what happens in a horror movie is obviously significant, but just as significant is how it's depicted. The same script might be carefully and movingly brought to life in the hands of one filmmaker, but in the hands of another, it might be made into exploitation with a camera that lingers gratuitously on its victims. So I guess the question to ask is this: is the filmmaker trying to empathize with the characters, or are they trying to objectify the characters? That for me is what distinguishes good horror from exploitation horror. There's also the heart of the viewer, because I think if we are watching horror in a healthy way, we are horrified by the horrors in the film, and we empathize with the characters who are grappling with those horrors. But there's a danger for us as horror fans, if we're not careful, to start to develop an unhealthy fascination with the darkness in these films and to kind of get a kick out of watching characters go through suffering and torment. So that's what I appreciate about The Cabin in the Woods. It confronts horror filmmakers and says, are you telling this story appropriately with good intentions? But it also confronts horror audiences, us, and says, are you watching these films with the right intentions? If the ancient ones represent the customers, the consumers of horror, the engineers represent the filmmakers. They are the ones tasked with delivering the goods to the customers. And Steve Hadley, an engineer, spends much of the film orchestrating the horror, making it as vivid and visceral as possible. His perverse job requires him to objectify the victims, to see them as nothing more than offerings for the beasts below. But at one point he almost finds himself empathizing with Dana.
It's so strange. I'm actually rooting for this girl. She's got so much heart. You think of all the pain and the...
He effectively has to leave his humanity at the door in order to do his job. So the engineers are puppeteers. They're constantly watching. They're intervening in all sorts of ways, adjusting the temperature, triggering pheromone mists. But within this petri dish, the characters do have some agency. Early in the film, they encounter a character known as the Harbinger. He imparts an ominous message.
You were rude to my friend.
That whore.
What'd you say?
I think we got enough gas.
You got enough to get you there. Getting back. That's your concern.
Will they choose to heed the warning and turn back? Or will they continue towards the cabin in the woods? They choose the latter. And in the cellar of the cabin, they are presented with a multitude of artifacts which can each trigger different horrors. Ultimately, it is Dana who unknowingly selects the adversary by reading the Latin incantation from the diary of Patience Buckner. This summons the zombified Buckner family from the stable below, a vast zoo of horrific entities waiting to be deployed. And this is a profound reflection on human nature that horror keeps tapping into. Almost every horror film contains some kind of forbidden fruit, something which is off limits to the characters. One room which must not be entered. One object which must not be touched. One spell which must not be spoken. And we as the audience are screaming at the characters, don't do it.
Do not read the Latin. Read it. What the f?
But what happens?
Dolor supplimus, Carl. Dolor igneo animos.
They do it. Every time. Whether out of curiosity or ignorance or rebellion, the characters eat the forbidden fruit. They press the self-destruct button, unleashing death and chaos in the story. And that idea goes right back to the ancient story of Adam and Eve, the origin of that phrase, forbidden fruit. Because in the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve, the first humans, are told that there is just one tree that is off limits. They are warned that eating from it will bring death. It's a clearly marked self-destruct button. But what do? They eat the fruit, bringing death into the world. And this is what human beings are like. And the engineers know this. Even though the young characters in the cabin have a degree of free will, there's still a sense of inevitability to all of this. Of course they're going to check out the cellar and mess around with the potentially devastating artifacts, even though they all look really spooky. So in the film, one of the requirements for the sacrificial ritual is that the victims come willingly to some degree.
They have to make the choice of their own free will. Otherwise, the system doesn't work. It's like the Harbinger. It's this creepy old practically wears a sign, you will die. Why do we put him there? The system. They have to choose to ignore him, and they have to choose what happens in the cellar. Yeah, we rig the game as much as we need to, but in the end, they don't transgress.
They can't be punished.
As we've seen, the film is making a jab at how the horror genre can go wrong. I wonder if it's also making a jab at religion. This idea of the engineers needing the teens to transgress so that they can be punished. I think that's how some people view God, a capricious deity who made it possible for humans to sin, so that he could then punish them. Now, whatever you make of the Bible, that interpretation doesn't actually fit, especially when you consider that the full force of God's judgment is shouldered by God himself, God the Son, on the cross. Whatever you make of that story, it's certainly unique. The idea that God's glory is most clearly revealed when he's nailed to a piece of wood, bleeding and praying for his enemies, pouring himself out in self-sacrificial love to gain the victory over sin, death, and hell. That's radical. That's not a distant God pronouncing judgments arbitrarily on humans from on high. No, that's a God who enters into human suffering. So the biblical narrative culminating in Christ and him crucified is the ultimate love story. But The Cabin in the Woods seems to take even language from the Bible and reframe it as something capricious and mean-spirited. Here's the Harbinger talking to Steve Hadley on the phone.
The lambs have passed through the gate. They are come to the killing floor.
Well, you're doing a great job out there. By the numbers, man. You got to start it off just right. So we'll talk to you later, okay?
Their blind eyes see nothing of the horrors to come. Their ears are stopped. They are the gods' fools.
That's how it works.
Cleanse them. Cleanse the world of their ignorance and sin. Bathe them in the crimson of... Am I on speakerphone?
And that language of lambs going to their slaughter, the world being cleansed of sin, people being washed in the crimson flood, these are biblical references. They're being used here in a sinister way to kind of create an ominous tone, but they're biblical references testifying to Christ and him crucified. So what's going on here? Well, the fact that the film contains some biblical references is not surprising. I mean, it's a film that's been made in a culture which has been heavily shaped by Christianity over the centuries. So biblical references are almost to be expected, whether they're conscious or not. But in the film, they're not being used to describe the biblical God, not overtly anyway. They're detached from their original context and are instead being used to paint a vivid picture of an underground pantheon of gods, the Ancient Ones.
The Ancient Ones see everything, and they will not be...
So we have some biblical references that will ring some bells for those of us who have grown up in a Christianized culture. But those references are being applied to a thoroughly unbiblical deity, right? Well, here's where it gets fascinating. According to the filmmakers, the Ancient Ones in The Cabin in the Woods are inspired by the Cthulhu mythos from H.P. Lovecraft. He was an atheist writer, but he was heavily influenced by the Greek and Roman pantheons, utterly disconnected from the Bible, right? Well, not exactly, because returning to that ancient text of Genesis, generations after the fall of Adam and Eve, you read about a different kind of fall, a fall of heavenly beings. When human beings began to increase in number on the earth and daughters were born to them, the sons of God, so these are heavenly beings called the sons of God, not the Son of God, not Jesus, but these are created heavenly beings called the sons of God. They saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. Then the Lord said, "My spirit will not contend with humans forever, for they are mortal. Their days will be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown." So the Nephilim are born from a perverse sexual union between these heavenly beings called the sons of God and human women. It's widely believed that they were giants, and notice they were the heroes of old, men of renown. They gained something of a following, perhaps even worship. And so what if many of the so-called gods, which have called forth worship and sacrifices around the world and down through history, are in fact these demonic creatures? What if the Greek gods were Nephilim? It's a disturbing thought, but among other things, it would explain why they behave like such scumbags. They're powerful, but they're also fallen. In the film, the Ancient Ones are described as these evil gods, and from what we see briefly of one, they're pretty massive, they're giant. Sounds quite a lot like the Nephilim. But there's more. This Genesis 6 account of the sons of God mating with human women to produce the Nephilim, that takes place just before the account of Noah and the flood. And then if you fast forward to the New Testament letters in the Bible, they seem to be picking up on this incident. For instance, the letter of Jude, the angels who did not keep their positions of authority but abandoned their proper dwelling, these he has kept in darkness, bound with everlasting chains for judgment on the great day. So there's a sense that the living God, the Lord, the ultimate uncreated ruler who presides over all these lowercase g gods, all these fallen angels, he has imprisoned them until the day of judgment. 2 Peter 2, God did not spare angels when they sinned, but sent them to hell, putting them in chains of darkness to be held for judgment. So who are these fallen angels that God is punishing? Are they the sons of God, described in Genesis 6? Or are they different angels? The word that's translated to hell there is the Greek word Tartarus, which was the abyss, the place of torment in Greek mythology, where the Titans were imprisoned. So I don't think Peter here is endorsing all of Greek mythology, but he is picking up on language that Greeks would have been familiar with. And he's saying, yeah, actually, there are these fallen heavenly beings, and God has chained them up, imprisoned them under the earth. So if that's the fate of the fallen angels, and perhaps the sons of God, what about their offspring with the human women, these Nephilim, giants? Well, this is a contentious issue, but the early church actually regarded demons as the spirits of Nephilim. So anyway, the upshot of all this is that the fallen heavenly beings, the sons of God who go wayward, the fallen angels, the Nephilim, they are all sentenced to imprisonment by God. And that's actually a sign of both God's judgment and mercy. He's judging these wayward heavenly beings, but it's also his mercy towards humanity that he chains them up and restrains them so that they can't do too much damage. So the Cabin in the Woods effectively imagines, what if humans became trapped in a system of sacrificial rituals to appease those ancient ones, those ancient lowercase g gods trapped under the earth? And what if they had the ability to break free? That's what the film imagines. A fragile situation in which humanity's survival depends upon some perverse rituals of human sacrifice offered to the demons down below. This brings us to the film's ending. Marty and Dana are the last survivors of their group, and they meet the facility director, who explains the particularities of the American ritual. It requires 5 archetypes to be offered in line with what we see in a typical slasher movie.
The whore, she's corrupted. She dies first. The athlete,
The scholar, the fool,
all suffer and die at the hands of whatever horror they have raised, leaving the last to live or die as fate decides, the virgin.
So in order to complete the ritual and save the world, Marty must die and Dana must be the final girl.
what's beneath us?
The ancient ones, the gods that used to rule the earth. The sun is coming up in 8 minutes. If you live to see it, the world will end.
Maybe that's the way it should be. If you gotta kill all my friends to survive, maybe it's time for a change.
We're talking about the agonizing death of every human soul on the planet. You can die with them, or you can die for them.
Gosh, they're both so enticing.
Now, I'm obviously a fan of great acts of self-sacrifice in stories. It's inspiring, right? But in this case, it's kind of complex, because laying down your life out of love for the people you're saving, that's one thing. But here, it also means offering yourself to the Ancient Ones. It means buying into a demonic system and appeasing it, and that cycle will just keep going. So within the world of the film, it's a bleak situation. Either you keep offering human sacrifices to keep the demons in their underground slumber, or you refuse, and the demons take over the world, killing everyone. It's a sick hierarchy. The whole system needs to come crashing down. So I'm actually kind of sympathetic to Marty and Dana choosing not to honour this particular sacrifice. However, I am troubled by Dana's reasoning.
I'm sorry I let you get attacked by a werewolf and then enter the world.
You were right. Humanity. It's time to give someone else a chance.
She seems to be saying, well, humanity isn't worth saving, so the Ancient Ones might as well rule the earth.
Giant evil gods.
I wish I could have seen it.
I know.
And I kind of want to say to her, no, Dana, it's true that humanity has fallen. It's true that we regularly unleash chaos in our lives. It's true that we have formed an alliance with the demonic to some degree. That's what happened when Adam and Eve took from the tree. They formed an alliance with the serpent. And this alliance needs to be torn down. But let's not throw out the baby with the bathwater. In her world, it's true, it's all bathwater and no baby. But in the real world, is there hope in the context of a fallen humanity? Well, remarkably, in the Bible, who does God side with? He doesn't side with the devil and the other fallen angels, those lowercase g gods, the imprisoned ancient ones. No, he sides with humanity. He comes to humanity's aid and condemns the fallen angels. And there's a really fascinating passage in 1 Peter 3 which appears to describe what Jesus did seemingly between his death and his resurrection. For Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, to bring you to God. He was put to death in the body, but made alive in the spirit. After being made alive, he went and made proclamation to the imprisoned spirits, to those who were disobedient long ago, when God waited patiently in the days of Noah while the ark was being built. So Jesus, after dying as a sacrifice for humanity on the cross, he then went to proclaim his victory over the imprisoned spirits, the fallen angels, the ancient ones, if you like. So he considers humanity, even in its depravity, to be worth saving rather than those ancient ones. Now, I don't know what you make of that, but that is the biblical narrative which has profoundly shaped our culture and storytelling for centuries. And whether it's intentional or not, The Cabin in the Woods is a kind of hopeless retelling of that biblical narrative, in which God, the true living God presiding over all, he seems to be absent, and instead we're left with a delicate balance between humanity on the earth and the ancient ones under the earth, and ultimately it's the ancient ones who come out on top, and all the humans die. So it's a tragedy, told with its tongue in its cheek, because deep down we know that this is not the way things are meant to be. We have a sense that horror shouldn't have the last laugh. So I enjoyed this film. It's pretty smart. It has a lot to say, I think. My name's Thomas Thorogood. I get into the deeper meaning of movies. Thank you so much for watching. And remember, it's deeper than you think.